Welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcast, where we go beyond the headlines into the stories that matter to you in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara. And today I am very pleased to be joined by journalist and Queen's Park Observer founder, Sabrina Nanji. And Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get right into what is Queen's Park Observer? What is that?
So it's pretty much a newsletter for political nerds, anyone that needs to know anything that's going on at Queen's Park. And I say nerds like it's a term of endearment. I'm also a political nerd at Queen's Park. And yeah, it's essentially covering everything from the headlines of the day to, including analysis to some scoops, what's happening at committee, pretty much everything you wanted to know about what's happening at the Pink Palace, which is a nickname for Queen's Park.
Now, I have to imagine that a lot of your subscribers are people who work in Queen's Park. How many, this has to be a talked about document when it comes up in the morning.
Yeah, you can see my dog is eager to get in on the conversation here. The house isn't sitting this week. I'm lucky enough to be working from home, and I think we all know what that can be like when we've got pets. But yeah, you're right. It's actually now, I'm proud to say, the most read newsletter at Queen's Park. The library was generous enough to buy a subscription for every politician, their staffer. I know some folks in the Premier's office are reading it because they are quick to tell me at 6 a.m. that they're not happy with something I'm writing. So it's an insider's newsletter for sure, but also, if you need to know what the folks at Queen's Park are reading every morning, I would say the newsletter is a good place for it.
Getting emails from the Premier's press department. I don't know what that's like at all, Sabrina. Let's get into the headlines Let's get into the headlines of the day. And one of the biggest ones is Sarah Jama, Hamilton MPP here. She apologized after making a statement about the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. How is this being felt at Queen's Park?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the NDP does not want to be dealing with this right now. Sarah Jama, somewhat of a rookie politician. She took over from Andrea Horvath, who was the longtime MPP there, former leader, now mayor, as you know. Sarah has had a bit of a rough go. This isn't the first time that she's landed in hot water and been forced to apologize for her remarks on the Israel-Hamas conflict. And, this week it's obviously flared up again. And we've sort of got this test of, rookie-ish leader Marit Stiles here and her caucus management. Marit Stiles had told Sarah Jama that you've got to take down this statement, her latest. We've got to retract it. It does not, jive with what our caucus position. And it was sort of this weird 24-hour standoff where the statement is still online that Sarah Jama made. And Marit Stiles has had to put out another statement saying that despite calls from Jewish advocacy groups, the Premier, who, might be looking for a channel changer, I'm sure we'll dig into that. And even the Liberals have been saying, Jama's got to go. She can no longer be on the NDP benches with these types of views, these types of statements. Marit Stiles has now come out and said that after, speaking to Jama, maybe learning more about the issue and what's going on, she's asked Jama to apologize. Jama has done that. She's called out Hamas and as terrorists, called for a ceasefire, which is something she had done from the get-go. And while I think these issues, Israel versus Palestine is sort of this perennial hot potato, and there's a lot of nuance to it, I think no matter what, wherever you fall on those lines, this has been a real tough week for the NDP and Marit Stiles in particular. It's a big test of her caucus management. It's a lot of airing of dirty laundry that the NDP and all parties, would typically do behind closed doors. Caucus has disagreements, but you normally don't air that in public. And this has become a very public fight where, Marit Stiles, obviously, according to some, has not gone far enough by giving Jama the boot here. And so I think that, for this to play out publicly has been somewhat of a distraction from the Ford government, and they're dealing with an RCMP investigation now into the Greenbelt. But certainly, it's not good for the NDP when they want all the heat to be on Doug Ford and what he's dealing with at the Greenbelt now.
You use the term caucus management, and that really does seem to stick with me. This is a rookie leader who is going to lead her party into the next election. Is it a bad look that she can't seem to control the message right now of her entire caucus?
Yeah, I mean, my kingdom to be a fly on the wall of what's going on behind the scenes in the NDP right now. But from what I've heard, yeah, I think a lot of people are split right now too. I mean, Marit Stiles, if you look at it one way, she's maybe taking the diplomatic approach here, but at the same time, you want to be seen as a strong leader, and the NDP, of course, had no competition for the leaders, right? Like Marit Stiles was pretty much crowned. It was a coronation. She was acclaimed. No one was running against her for leader. And while the NDP likes to say that that's because they're all united behind one leader, there are certainly questions being raised about Marit's leadership here. And I think the premier has been trying to throw salt in the wounds here. If you sort of read between the lines of his statement saying that, Marit Stiles has got to do what, major Jewish advocacy groups have called for and said, give Sarah Jama the boot from caucus, and I'll do what Marit Stiles won't do. I'll call for her resignation. That's the premier's line. But it's a bit rich also coming from the premier, who of course is sort of hoping to capitalize on this politically. But he's also, been dealing with the loss of a couple of his ministers, key staffers, and some of the, the drama going around the Greenbelt, which is, by far not over by a long shot. But certainly I think a welcome distraction for him, maybe not so much, of course, for Marit Stiles, who may be seen here as, a bit of a weak leader because you're not able to crack the whip and get an MPP to fall in line. I mean, she called on Sarah Jama to retract her statement. It's still online. Maybe just, she's added a bit of context to it.
Yeah, there's some added tweets to the original tweet, which you mentioned still stands there. You mentioned Doug Ford going after her in his own statement. Do you get the sense that when the House resumes, this is going to be front and center for the Conservatives? This is going to be their talking point to distract everybody, or to try to distract everybody from the RCMP Greenbelt investigation?
Yeah, I think we can expect that. I mean, they've now got the new housing minister, Paul Calandra, sort of fielding the questions on the Greenbelt. And I have to say, for all the talk about how Marit Stiles has sort of failed to launch, how we've got in general a weakened opposition, the Liberals don't even have a leader right now. The NDP has done a very good job of holding Doug Ford's feet to the fire over, the latest in the Greenbelt. And so when MPPs come back next week, you can definitely expect them to lead with the RCMP launching a full-on investigation now. But of course, the PCs are going to be trying to change the channel. They don't want to talk about this. They're going to be zeroing in on the Jama controversy. I mean, that is, of course, top of mind for a lot of folks right now, especially with what we're seeing in the Middle East. But at the end of the day, I mean, the RCMP investigation is a very big deal for the Ford government. I mean, I just want to be clear. It's a big if there's going to be criminal charges or a trial. I mean, we're still, a ways away from that. But this thing could take months, possibly years. It could really drag out, and it just adds fuel to the fire of, things were not on the up and up with the Greenbelt land swap here. And I think most damaging to the Ford government would be if there are criminal charges, when will these possibly land? We have seen such investigations land at inopportune times for governments in charge. I mean, don't forget the Liberals and the gas plant scandal, the Sudbury bribery by-election scandal. These are police investigations that came to a head around election time, and of course it's damaging and will seriously hinder the PCs on their path to re-election in 2026.
Dalton McGuinty's staffer did go to jail, right? I have that right? There have
That's
been
right.
consequences to these sorts of situations. Let's get into that RCMP investigation. Was the Ford government expecting this, do you think? Once the investigation was handed off from the OPP, did this come as a surprise to the PC party?
I would say no. Like, according to my sources, it sort of felt like it was an inevitability. I had heard that the RCMP were sort of poking around a little bit, asking questions. There is a process to all of this, and so they need to, prepare enough to go to a judge and have a judge say, yes, you can get warrants to search this information that you or I or even the Auditor General or the Integrity Commissioner might not have access to. And so they have been doing a lot of legwork behind the scenes. I think the Conservatives were aware this was coming. And it was interesting to me that when the Premier made this big, stunning, but, almost inevitable announcement that he was going to be changing course on the Greenbelt, he was asked by our fellow reporters, is this something to throw the RCMP off the scent? And Ford said, no, not at all. He's maintained that he's confident nothing criminal happened and he's willing to cooperate. But it's just, the timing of it is striking because, of course, a couple of days later, the RCMP is launching this full-on investigation. So while the reversal might have been, as much as the PCs might have been a way to take the heat off of them politically on this. I mean, this is not going away anytime soon. And while, the RCMP could just as easily say here, nothing to see, we're moving on from this, having this hang over their heads is just, more of a headache. The Premier is visibly upset. You can see, he's sort of drained at Queen's Park. He's been a lot more stressed, is what I'm hearing from the people closest to him. So it's, this could be a rough ride coming up.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, this RCMP investigation, the reversal of his decision, there's still the urban boundary. We have a local councillor here who says she wants an investigation into that, the overriding of local municipalities by enforcing these new urban boundaries. I know Ottawa is involved in that as well. And this is not the only thing the Premier is dealing with right now. Right? I mean, it seems like there's the Ontario Health Coalition that's been protesting. There's been a lot going on. What have you made from basically what the Premier is facing when the House returns?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, but don't forget he's still got his whopping majority here, right?
Yeah.
So, and they do have Paul Calandra, as I mentioned, sort of taking up this troubled housing file, and he is known as like the government's troubleshooter here. If you've ever watched him in question period or in a debate or even seen him take questions from the media, I mean, it's exhausting. It really is, I will say. He's very good, and I'm sure the Conservatives, that's not lost on them, and he is, a smart pick to handle this file because the way he sort of sticks to his talking points, I'll just put it that way, and kind of goes on and on with his answers. I mean, at the end of it, you're almost just kind of like, okay, like, let's move on and talk about something else. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like, that's just more of a political comms perspective on this, but of course the Conservatives don't want to be answering questions about it, and I do think that the MZOs is not going away either. What we heard from the Auditor General's office is that they are looking into these boundary expansions and overriding in some cases of municipal official plans in the name of housing and development, and so this will be looked at through the Auditor General's regular reporting. We're expecting that to come out in December of this year. It's like Christmas for reporters, the Auditor General's reports. But certainly this is not going away anytime soon for the Ford government. Whether or not it has lasting damage, I think still remains to be seen. 2026 is still far ways away. And I think if the Conservatives, and again, another big if here, can actually make some progress on the housing file, that's really their only saving grace here. And it's a long shot right now. I mean, 1.5 million homes over a decade is virtually impossible because we've never had anywhere close to the housing starts that the government will need in order to achieve that goal. And a lot of folks are arguing that, their first year of their second mandate this past year has already been wasted sort of because of this back and forth on the Greenbelt. Is the land going up for grabs or not? They've had to put it back. And so it feels like this could really be where the Conservatives, see themselves on shaky ground.
And like you said, this is something, now that it's an RCMP investigation, as much as they want to put it behind them, it's not going away. This investigation, as you said, could take months and could be something, even though 2026 is a long ways away, could be something we're still talking about in 2026. Speaking of that election year, the Liberals do not have a leader at this point. They are in the middle of a leadership campaign. It seems like they're on the sidelines. They're not an official party in Queen's Park, right? They don't have official party status. How are they staying relevant? We'll get to the leadership candidates in a second, but how are they staying relevant in these discussions at Queen's Park?
It's been tough, I would say, for them, but I definitely think the leadership race has been galvanizing. They've been getting a lot of attention for it. It hasn't been like the cleanest race. There's a lot of big players in there, high-profile names: Bonnie Crombie, Nate Erskine-Smith, Yasser Naqvi, Ted Hsu, all sitting politicians essentially who have differing views somewhat. I mean, of course, they're all liberals, but they all have different takes. They've all, it hasn't exactly been like a super friendly race either. They've all taken jabs at one another, and I do think that has galvanized them a bit. They've been doing much better on the fundraising, which all political parties need in order to run like a competitive campaign. They've been getting, a lot of media coverage about this. But you're right, at Queen's Park, they're kind of handicapped here. When you don't have recognized status, that means you don't get enough as much talking time as the NDP would as official opposition in question period. You don't have a lot of resources and staff to kind of help you do the research that you need in order to do your job and hold the government to account. So it's been a struggle for them. But if you talk to the Liberals now, certainly the ones I'm talking to are feeling galvanized that they're going to be making a comeback. And if you look at the public opinion polls that we've seen, the Liberal brand is still strong in Ontario. And so while, they've sort of been in the penalty box with voters for the last two elections, I think it's possible that with the right leader and the right campaign, they could really mount, a competitive opposition to not only Doug Ford and the Conservatives, but also the NDP, which of course, there tends to be vote splitting in Ontario can happen. And so when the Liberals and the NDP are fighting, the Conservatives tend to be happy about that. And so it really feels like 2026 could be anybody's game these days.
Well, and the Liberals do have some encouraging signs, a pair of by-elections. One was sort of safely, but how galvanizing was that for them, and how concerned were the PCs with those two by-election results a few months ago?
Yeah, I had to think for a second and remind myself that there were by-elections not too long ago, just because of the news cycle at Queen's Park has been a whirlwind. But that's, also something the Ford government is feeling pretty down about and is impacting morale, whereas the Liberals are like, we're back. I think that's exactly what John Fraser said at the victory night on by-election night. We're back, baby. And while Scarborough was a long-held seat by Mitzi Hunter, the Conservatives put up a really strong fight here. They had resources all going towards Gary Crawford, their candidate, who was a former councillor at City Hall, former budget chief in Toronto. I mean, he's got a lot of name recognition, but he just couldn't turn it out for them. And the Liberals were able to hang on to that seat. And they also took Kanata Carleton, which was the riding formerly represented by Marilee Fullerton, a PC former minister, who had stepped aside, and Karen McCrimmon, the former Liberal MP, took that for the provincial Liberals this time around. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think those were big wins for the Liberals, but there's a lot of caveats here and a lot of factors at play. It's summer, turnout tends to be a lot lower. In Kanata Carleton, Karen McCrimmon had a lot of name recognition, and over in Scarborough, I mean, Mitzi Hunter had held on to that riding for a long time, but also, people are upset at Doug Ford and the Ford government. This was sort of before the Greenbelt saga blew up in August, and I think that before that there was still these sort of this vibe around Queen's Park that something big was coming on the Greenbelt, and even that's felt in the public, but also healthcare and housing, and voters were probably looking to send the Ford government a message here, I think, and in saying that they're not happy with how things are. I mean, not everything is on the province. There's a lot at City Hall and at the federal level that that's factoring in here. But of course, with cost of living sky high, rent is unaffordable. People are struggling even to buy groceries these days. I think that all governments at all levels should be shaking in their boots a little bit.
Now, before we go, I want to get back into the Liberal leadership race. Bonnie Crombie, when you talk to people, they say she's the front runner. You look at polling, she is the front runner. But also by the attacks that she's getting. People attacking where she's getting her fundraising dollars. How do you see this race playing out? We're kind of at the halfway point. Where do you see this going in the next few weeks, few months?
Yeah, I think we can start to see the knives being sharpened for Bonnie Crombie. She's certainly the front runner. She's raised over $1 million. She, according to her own numbers, has signed up the most members. And because the Liberals are doing one member, one vote, that matters. But just keep in mind, those are self-reported numbers, and they tend to be inflated. Like every campaign will blow up their numbers. And it really just comes down to the voting weekend, which is going to happen at the end of November. And so it still could be anybody's game. Anything could really happen. But I do think that everyone is sort of bracing for a Bonnie Crombie leadership, whether you like that or not. I mean, we've seen Nate Erskine-Smith, Yasser Naqvi call Bonnie Crombie Doug Ford Light. They've attacked her, as you mentioned, for getting donations from developers, from her less than stellar record on housing in Mississauga. They've come at her in so many levels, and it's not only friendly fire she's getting from her fellow liberal rivals. It's also the Conservatives that are attacking her, and they have pounced on her almost every step of the way. So it also goes to show you that the Conservatives also think that Bonnie Crombie is going to take this leadership in December, and that she could actually give them a run for their money, which we have seen polls sort of, fall in line with that thinking too, that Bonnie Crombie could be somebody that could take the PCs on. I mean, she's no stranger to going head to head with Doug Ford, especially in her role as head of the big city mayors of Ontario. She clearly gets under Doug Ford's skin. She's great at fundraising. I mean, you need to mount a serious campaign, and that takes money. And so I do think that she would give the Liberals a good shot, especially in the GTA, which you kind of need when it comes to boosting your seat count at Queen's Park, and she's a Mississauga mayor. But it's still, anything could happen at this point. It's all going to come down to, the Liberal voters and who they want to be their leader.
Another point, you mentioned Mississauga mayor. You also have to remember, under this Doug Ford government, Mississauga now in the middle of a dissolution between Halton and Peel as well. So, I mean, all that stuff going on. Lots to get into. I appreciate it. Even on a week off, Sabrina, you making the time for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That is Sabrina Nanji. She is a journalist at Queen's Park, and she's the founder of Queen's Park Observer. It is the #1 playbook you need to know for what's going on at Queen's Park, the Pink Palace, as it's called. And maybe it shows my greenness on the subject, but didn't know that it was called that. But Sabrina Nanji, of course, does a great job covering that. My thanks to her for joining me so much. And my thanks to you as well, because you know what? We could not do the show without your support. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we might have for you, including a brand new episode of the Trending Now podcast that will be dropping tomorrow. But right there on your screen, if you are watching, you can hit that QR code and you will be able to subscribe, or just go to chch.com/podcast. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to everybody behind the scenes who put this together. On behalf of all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko, hoping you have a great day.